وأقيموا الوزن بالقسط ولا تخسروا الميزان والأرض وضعها للأنام.
Tonight, a new documentary is raising questions about the assassination of Malcolm X.
The new documentary is called Brother Minister, the assassination of Hajj, Malik, Shabazz, Malcolm X. And in it is contained passages from a speech by Louis Farrakhan. And here is one excerpt.
What have you got to say about it? Did you teach Malcolm? Did you make Malcolm? Did you clean up Malcolm? Did you put Malcolm out before the world? Was Malcolm your traitor or was he ours? And if we dealt with him like a nation deals with a traitor, what the hell business is it of yours?
That was in 1993.
Really? A few months ago.
Yeah. On Savior's Day, I believe.
I see.
Tonight, the Nation of Islam is reacting with anger to allegations that have put its leader under fire. Those sensational charges are in a story we told you about exclusively on News 4 New York last night. The widow of Malcolm X is accusing Louis Farrakhan of involvement in Malcolm's assassination.
I'm Kurt Loder with MTV News. The controversy surrounding Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan grew even more heated this weekend when Betty Shabazz, the widow of the slain Nation of Islam defector Malcolm X, implicated Farrakhan in her husband's assassination. It happened on an NBC Sunday morning show called News Forum when reporter Gabe Pressman showed Shabazz this video clip from an as yet unreleased documentary of Farrakhan addressing a closed-door meeting of his followers in 1993.
Was Malcolm your traitor or was he ours?
Do I think that Louis Farrakhan had? Of course, yes. I mean, it was a matter of, it was a badge of honor. I mean, nobody kept it a secret. It was a badge of honor. Everybody talked about it.
There was no love lost between Malcolm X and Louis Farrakhan, the current leader of the Nation of Islam, but now the widow of Malcolm X has made a stunning allegation that Farrakhan was involved in some way in her husband's assassination.
I would like to know, in that film strip that I just saw, I didn't see the documentary. But I'd like to know, what is it that they claim Malcolm did?
This is why I say it's the ballot or the bullet. It's liberty or it's death. It's freedom for everybody or freedom for nobody.
When Malcolm came into the ballroom that Sunday, I met him in the middle aisle, and I escorted him in the back to a little office area in the back of the ballroom, which sits off to the, well, if you're the speaker, it's off to the left, and if you're facing the stage, it's off to the right. And as the rally started to form up, myself and three others were given front rostrum spots. I had the spot on the right-hand side, the same place I escorted Malcolm into, and there was three others across the front of the stage.
He stands in the doorway of the dressing room listening to Benjamin 2X warm up the crowd with inspirational metaphor and promises of eternal paradise. Something feels wrong out there, he tells those around him. Then the minister quietly moves behind the rostrum, takes a seat, assembles his notes, and prepares himself to take center stage, as he has done for the past 12 long years.
I didn't see him. I was made aware that he was sitting behind me, and he had walked out of the green room. You know, I guess that's what they call it, where performers would make up and wait to come out on stage. And evidently he had laid something on a piece of paper on a chair beside him, which was slightly to my right. And when I looked down, I saw his hand reach for whatever he had laid in the chair, paper. And I guess him being very sensitive realized that I was aware that he was there. And he said, "Make it plain." Make it plain was, I'm ready to come forward. That's all it meant. It didn't mean continue to talk. And I said, "I now bring before you a man that would give his life for his people."
Just as Benjamin was ending his speech, the four of us was relieved. We went to the back of the ballroom. We were told to find seats in the audience and report back to the same location to relieve the other brothers that were up front. As that meeting was breaking up, Malcolm was being introduced. He came on the stage. Two individuals about 4 or 5 rows back started a commotion, "Get your hands out my pocket, nigga." I started walking towards them, and all of a sudden I see 3 individuals up front pumping shots at Malcolm. And they were moving from Malcolm's right toward the center aisle. I turned and went back toward the center aisle. 2 people passed me, and that's when I met Hayer. He pointed his gun at me, and just as he fired, I turned sideways and hit him with the chair and knocked him down, and he got up and started scampering out.
I entered on the 166th Street side of the Audubon Ballroom, and I started up the stairs, and I heard a voice, and I think that voice either had to be Earl Grant's or Brother Rubin's. And I heard him say, "Stop that guy, he just shot Malcolm." And I turned around, I stuck my foot out, he stumbled, and I turned around and ran back down the stairs, and about 10 or 20 people pounced on him. So he wasn't going anywhere. And 2 police officers emerged with their guns drawn and took the crowd. They rescued this man, it turned out to be Thomas Hayer. They rescued him, but my recollection tells me that there was someone else there besides Thomas Hayer. I believe 2 men were put in the police car and taken to the police station.
I didn't really hear what Brother Benjamin said, but by the time Brother Malcolm came on, I was sitting, there facing the steps. And I heard Brother Malcolm say, "Assalamu alaikum." Now, I didn't see him because, this little room is kind of off the main. When you walk into the main ballroom, there's like these swinging, doors, and you go into them, and then you into the main ballroom. I was in this little, so I heard him say "Assalamu alaikum," and the next thing I heard was shots. And I mean many shots. I mean, it sounded almost like a battlefield from the way it sounded. I got up, I ran through the doors into the main ballroom. By this time, of course, people are running out. And people are screaming, and you hear people screaming and crying, and chairs being knocked over. And so I was knocked to the floor, and I lay there, covering my head.
And then when much of this stopped, I jumped up, I ran down to the stage, I jumped up on the stage, and I saw him laying there. By this time, Mrs. Koshiyama had his head kind of in her lap, and someone had pulled his shirt open, and I saw all these bullet holes in his chest, and he was gasping. He was gasping for breath. He was not dead yet. He was gasping for breath.
I went straight to the stage, and I jumped up on the stage, felt Malcolm's pulse. He still had one, but it was weak. And then I started to give him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. And after maybe about 5 minutes, I felt, I'd say it was over. I got up, not wanting to tell Betty that he was dead. I told Betty that I'm getting a little tired and a little dizzy. Maybe somebody else could try. And at that point, she got on her knees next to him and started giving him the old arm lift method. But it was too late.
Assassin Hare is transported to the 34th Precinct, where police recover an unused .45 caliber clip from his pocket. He is then taken to a hospital to have treated a bullet wound in his leg and other injuries he suffered in his escape. Back at the ballroom, people rush to the stage in horror and disbelief. There's snakes in the community, says bodyguard Kerry 2X. As police reinforcements arrive, they lift him onto a stretcher commandeered from Columbia Presbyterian Hospital and roll him out the door and across the street to the emergency room.
At about 3 p.m. on February 21st, 1965, at the Audubon Ballroom, Malcolm X, male Negro, 39 years of age, was shot and killed as he was on the stage of the main ballroom. 13 of these shots taking effect.
His body is placed in a plastic shroud and sent under guard to Unity Funeral Home so that the people of Harlem can pay their last respects. And his burial is further delayed to allow African politicians he knew to attend. None do. Riots are feared. Rumor spreads through the streets. He was murdered by the FBI, by the New York City police, and by CIA agents. The temple he once led is burned to the ground the night after he was slain. Bomb threats are received at the funeral parlor. 22,000 people file past him. Men and women weep and faint. Saturday, February 27, 1965, Sudanese Muslim Sheikh Hassoun washes and anoints his friend with scented oil and wraps him in a white sheet. The New York Times headline reads, "The Apostle of Hate is dead." In fear of violent retribution from those who despised him, no church in Harlem, save the Faith Temple Church of God in Christ, will have his funeral service. The motorcade winds its way uptown and through the Bronx to Ferncliff Cemetery in Westchester County. At the grave, his disciples stop the Union diggers from filling in the hole. They lay down their shovels. The brothers pick them up, and the mourners watch in silence as he is laid to rest. Despite airtight alibis, Norman Butler and Thomas Johnson are arrested at their homes a week after Thomas Hare's capture. Hare testifies in court that he was one of the assassins and that Butler and Johnson had nothing to do with the crime, but he refuses to identify his real accomplices. The jury convicts all three defendants of murder in the first degree, and they are sentenced to life behind bars. Norman Butler and Thomas Johnson will spend the next 2 decades in jail for a crime they did not commit. It would be more than 10 years before Thomas Hare would reveal the names of his true accomplices and the nature of their murderous conspiracy.
In prison, I was never approached about Malcolm X. No one ever approached me and said to me, "You killed," like I hear today, "you killed our great prince, our great leader." No one ever came to me and said, "We don't know where we would be at today, man, if that man was still alive. He was in his prime, very prominent. And we feel as though we're going to run you in protection. We don't want you in population." No one ever said anything to me of that nature.
To have once been a criminal is no disgrace. To remain a criminal is the disgrace. I formerly was a criminal.
He educated himself while serving hard time in prison. Soon after his release, he traveled to Chicago to meet the man whose teachings had raised him from ignorance and faithlessness to a person of discipline, inquisitiveness, and eloquence. That man, sometimes referred to by his followers as the Lamb, was the leader of the Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad.
The first time I met Malcolm was at my father's home. And he had been released from prison and had attended the temple, I believe, in Detroit. And his brother, his oldest brother, brought him, was there with him, and I met Malcolm and had a very good meeting with him and formed a friendship almost instantly.
I met him in Detroit in the year 1952. We happened to be working on a construction site, and during the lunch hour, Malcolm came over and asked me, did I know why the sun rises in the east? And it puzzled me because I'd never had no one to ask a question like that before to me. So when we went back to work, he kept looking at me with a smile on his face. And he thought, well, he knew then that I was confused. But as a result of it, he later, the next day, invited me to come to Mosque number 1. And that's where, for the first time, I heard him give his lecture on the history of Yaku and the history of about eating the swine. I went back home that afternoon and throwed out all of the pork chops and all of the food that pertaining to swine. And that's where that my wife and my wanted to have me committed to the insane asylum.
He rose quickly through the organization's ranks. Elijah gave him the freedom to travel and preach. With missionary zeal, he converted multitudes on ghetto street corners and established temples and businesses for the faithful. He served as minister of the Harlem Temple in New York City, and the organization gained visibility and wealth with him as a star attraction.
Malcolm Little, while not having been arrested in this city, is known to the criminal files of this department as a result of arrests in other cities, namely Lansing, Michigan, Detroit, Michigan, and Milton, Dedham, Concord, and Boston. He has served a term in Massachusetts State Prison number 22843 after having been convicted of the crime of burglary.
When I came back from Africa in 1958, I was research director of an African heritage exposition at the World's Trade Show building then on 8th Avenue. Malcolm X would come in sometime twice a day, sometime once a day, to see how the exhibition was getting along. And then about the second visit, he noticed me, and we began to talk. And when he discovered my proficiency in history, which is something I've taught most of my adult life, he began to ask me questions about history. And later on, when he started making speeches on history, he asked me to compile folders on different aspects of history.
The Muslims who follow the Honorable Elijah Muhammad don't see any way in which the so-called Emancipation Proclamation that Lincoln allegedly made 100 years ago has freed our people or has done anything good for our people.
Our friendship began around information. And Malcolm X had something most people don't seem to be aware of, is a shadow non-Muslim cabinet. I was in the history cabinet. Another person was in the political science cabinet. Another one for sociology. One of the things that made Malcolm X so devastatingly effective It's his pursuit of information wherever he could find it. And he did not assume that the Muslims had it. He went outside and got it. But he did not become less a Muslim. But he knew there was a whole lot of non-Muslims who were sympathetic toward him, who would furnish him information. At this point, the Nation of Islam was no religion, but a sect and a cult. With the self-proclaimed Messiah. Malcolm X was the appointed spokesman for the nation. And he had taken an organization with 7 mosques and maybe less than 2,000 people. Malcolm X had made this a mass organization, a nationwide recognized organization.
You could put all of the followers in a station wagon and still have some room left. But Malcolm was able to take that and move it into large numbers, because in the beginning, the Lost Foundation of Islam was supposed to be just a little small group, and they were supposed to operate out of the various back streets of those who was down on what we consider on the bottom. But Malcolm envisioned, and he was able to take that and move it across the country. And then you began to get the upper class bracket. You would begin to recruit college students. You began to recruit them in all walks of life, lawyers and doctors and so forth. And this is what he was able to do. That's when the movement really started growing.
But in answer to your former question, are we recruiting? You don't have to recruit Negroes today. When a Negro is born in America, he's dissatisfied, and dissatisfied Negroes know that Mr. Muhammad makes the best spokesman black people can have in this country.
In ratio to the African American society, the Nation of Islam was really a very small number of people compared to the millions of black people. But the influence was great. It was, like Malcolm used to say, the fuse is much smaller than the dynamite, the stick of dynamite. But it can influence the stick if you light it. So it wasn't so much the numbers, but it was the influence. And those people that did join, they found like myself, I found a home.
Elijah Muhammad, and this is to his credit, had created a form of Islam that communicated to his black constituency. And this Islam might resemble the Orthodox a little less than mist resembles rain. But it did communicate. It did create the means for a whole lot of people to reclaim themselves and people to come out of prisons and be men again and be whole again. I think the collective achievement of Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X might be centered in essence on the fact that so many human beings who had given up on themselves learned to believe in themselves again.
I did my best to try to get as much information as I could on the men that Hare named. For a few of them, it wasn't as difficult. For others, for one in particular.
One prophesied to come, his name is Elijah. We now can stand up, the whole world to tell.
Seeking to better his lot during the Depression years, Elijah moved his wife and children from their home in rural Georgia and settled in Detroit, Michigan. There he met a mysterious man claiming to be from Mecca, called Prophet W.D. Farad, who peddled silks and raincoats door to door. He told his customers they were descended from the tribe of Shabazz and were the prophesied lost sheep, and hinted he was their long-awaited savior.
He would show them his silks, and he says, this is what your people were wearing before they were brought to America as slaves and put in slaves and taken away from their religion, Islam. So he would tell them that they were once Muslims, they once wore the silk garments or silk clothing, and that would make them attract them to be interested in it. And then once he did that, he would begin to organize a group of them to form a temple.
Farad said the so-called white people of America and Europe were a race of wicked devils and would soon be destroyed in a lake of fire. When police asked him who he was, Farad answered, I am the supreme ruler of the universe. Elijah joined Deputy Farad's nation of lost founds, studied under him intensely and constantly, and ultimately became his supreme minister. And only a few years later, the mysterious Messiah, Deputy Farad, vanished.
There is the rumor, or the theory, that he met with some mishap and that some of his own followers that were discontent, felt betrayed by him, or wanted to take his place, sacrificed him, and that he actually put himself up for a sacrifice. That's also rumored, that he accepted to be a sacrifice, so he would die as a Christ or something. But I don't believe any of that.
Following the Savior's disappearance, Elijah proclaimed himself to be the leader of the nation. Through the coming decades, all male converts would continue to be known, as Farad had first designated them, as FOI, the fruit of Islam, an army of disciplined, well-groomed, physically imposing young men who would safeguard the new apostle and his appointed ministers.
The activity of the security and the fruit of Islam was based around what we would call a military, based around that their responsibility is anyone is to secure their mosque, to make sure that the mosque was protected, to make sure that they was protecting each other, to make sure that nothing would come of any of the officials, nothing would have come, in particular to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad.
I got there early, and there were a lot of people coming in that Sunday to hear him. They ushered me up a flight of steps and toward the men's room, and the women went in the opposite direction. And I met, there were two brothers in there, very, very clean cut, well dressed, shirt tie, close haircut, and they said, asked if I had any weapons to take whatever that was in my pockets, lay it on this little table, and explained that they had to search.
You certainly had a change of command, and the change of command was based around captains, lieutenants, sergeants, and of the head of different squads.
So I held my hands out. They went down my sleeve, inside of my, one hand on the outside of my coat, one hand on the inside, and then around my waist, two thumbs. I pick my feet from the floor so they could check the bottom of my shoes and my shoe heel. I had a pen. They took the pen out and they pressed it toward me. Click, click. And they stood very close, you know, when they were searching. They would, especially under your coat, when they went under your coat, around your shirt. He'd open up the meeting and welcoming everybody, explaining what Assalamu alaikum mean, and the blackboard that it had an American flag, and around the flag it says slavery, suffering, and death. And then there was on the opposite side, the right side, there was a crescent, like the Turkish flag, that said Islam, freedom, justice, and equality. And then in the center, there was a drawing of a black man hanging from a tree. And then it says, which one will survive the war of Armageddon? It's between this and this. He explained what that meant, you know, how we had been in slavery here. And surprisingly enough, probably even today, most of us really don't know our history here in this country.
Abraham Lincoln tricked the so-called Negro into thinking that he was free. And when you read some of the books that were written by the so-called Negro historian J.E. Rogers, one of his books, God, the Africa's Gift to America, he points out plainly how Abraham Lincoln did nothing but trick the Negro, fool the Negro, and use the Negro, the same as every other politician who has been in the White House has been tricking and fooling and using the Negro as a political football ever since America has been America.
God made a promise to Abraham, his seed would be a stranger in a foreign land. They would suffer and be afflicted 400 years, but he would come, wipe away their tears.
I was a student at Howard University when the sit-in started in Greensboro by the North Carolina A&T students in Greensboro, North Carolina. And I was a member of that group that used to picket Woolworths in Washington to show our support for the brothers down in Greensboro. That was my first political activism, was doing that. And then when I come to New York, I had been involved in some of the different things that was going on up there. But so I was mainly, I guess, was part of what, for want of a better term, the Martin Luther King wing of the movement. But even before I actually got involved with Brother Malcolm, I had begun to become kind of, disillusioned with that kind of total nonviolence approach to the whole thing. And not just that, but also, the analysis of what was going on just did not make as much sense to me as what he was saying, his analysis of the system and how it worked. I first heard Brother Malcolm speak in the summer of 1962. Now, of course, we had both heard of Malcolm X at this time, mostly negative stuff. He was the boogeyman who hated all white folks and was calling them devils and that kind of thing. And so we decided to hear what he had to say. And by the time he finished, he spoke over 2 hours. It was a warm June, very warm, hot, really. And by the time he finished, I said to myself, and I said to my roommate, he makes more sense, and his analysis of, the racial situation makes more sense than anything I've ever heard anyone say. Anyone.
What makes the so-called Negro unable to stand on his own 2 feet? He has no self-confidence. He has no confidence in his own race. Because the white man destroyed your and my past, destroyed our knowledge of our culture. And by having destroyed it, now we don't know we have any achievement, any accomplishment. And as long as you can be convinced that you never did anything, you can never do anything.
My allegiance actually was with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. That's where my allegiance was. And I didn't even so much, as far as I can remember, I wasn't that much attracted to his teacher. They called W.D. Farrakhan.
Here, it's pretty well documented. He was in and out of trouble, but he was someone who was viewed on, as just a good brother who would take chances, who would take risks.
There comes a time in all mass movements when fires of passion cool, a time when bureaucracy and vested interests take over. By the early 1960s, the leadership of Elijah Muhammad's Lost Foundation had grown fat and comfortable. The minister of Harlem's Temple No. 7 and national spokesman for the nation could not shut his eyes to the ethical contradictions nor the corruption which had woven its way into the core of the movement.
Now, the fruit of Islam that he had developed, Farrakhan that he had trained, began to create an atmosphere within
the nation that caused Elijah Muhammad to be suspicious of the activity of Malcolm X. This suspicion was brought about because the old man's perpetual illness and the assumption that Malcolm X, because he was the best known Muslim in the world at the time, would be the logical successor to Elijah. Some of the people who came into the nation were reformed crooks. Some of them went through the motion of being reformed, but were still crooks, stealing from the nation.
Millions and millions of dollars that had just been squandered. He said the government wanted $5 million in taxes. There were apartment buildings that had been bought that were in ruins. There was farmland, 1,600 acres, orchards, fertile land that had just gone to waste. There were people that would walk into the businesses and open the cash registers, officials, and just take whatever money they wanted.
They knew because Malcolm was an honest man, he would do some house cleaning. He might clean them out.
A number of Elijah's secretaries have become pregnant and are expelled from the nation on charges of committing adultery and fornication. The minister meets with the women, and upon being told by them that Elijah is the father of their children, he goes to Phoenix to see the man who had reclaimed, redeemed, and resurrected him from mental and spiritual death. At Elijah's estate in Arizona, the old man counsels his minister that many biblical prophets and patriarchs also had shortcomings. Back home in New York, the minister repeats what Elijah told him to two nation officials, the captain of Temple No. 7's FOI, Joseph X, and the Boston minister, Louis X. They say they already know the truth about Elijah and the women, and then they report the minister to national headquarters in Chicago for spreading rumor and causing doubt and dissension among the faithful.
Just a moment. We have a bulletin coming in. We now switch you directly to Parkland Hospital.
The President of the United States is dead.
Mr. Mohammed had sent a letter telling all the ministers don't say anything bad about President Kennedy because black people love Kennedy, and he didn't want to turn African Americans against the Nation of Islam.
Well, I said the same thing that everybody says, that his assassination was the result of the climate of hate. Only I said the chickens came home to roost, and which means the same thing.
So it was expedient to find something on him that could get him suspended or removed or demoted in some form. It wasn't just that instance that caused his suspension. It had been building up to that point. And the national secretary was there, who went back to John Ali, who went back to Chicago and told Mr. Mohammed that Malcolm had spoke out against President Kennedy. He was given a 90-day suspension. It was normal to if you break a law or you disobey Mr. Mohammed in some way, that you're given a suspension. But at that time, we didn't know really what was going on, and we didn't know really why he was suspended, and that there were conditions, and the conditions were that he was not to hold any press conferences or make public statements while he was on suspension. And he did hold press conferences, and he did make public statements. See, he knew that was it for him in the Nation of Islam. Otherwise, he wouldn't have done that. He knew it.
He had told Elijah Muhammad previously, we have something going here,
that can be of great service to our people, and we should not destroy it with any dissension between the two of us. I think all of Malcolm X's letters were intercepted and all of his tapes were intercepted.
I told Malcolm, and this is the conversation that I had with Malcolm, I said, never in your life that you will ever be able to go up on the mountain again. That's terms that I use. He said, you really believe that? I said, I'm definite. They will never let you get back there again.
It is felt that Malcolm's presence in Chicago is the most adequate form of disruption possible, as it is causing extreme discontent in the royal family and may well set off a chain reaction.
I didn't leave, number one. I was put out, no matter, and since there was no justification for them putting me out, they had to make it appear to the public that I left of my own volition. But it was in February of 1963 that Wallace Mohammed, one of the sons of Elijah Muhammad, pointed out to me that his father had a very serious moral problem, which he had kept a careful secret up to that point.
There's some truth to that, but there was never any intent on my part to separate Malcolm and my father, or to harm in the least their relationship. No, there was never any desire in me like that.
Assistant ministers were told by officials, captain there, that I guess orders came out of Chicago, that we should speak out against him to show our loyalty to Mr. Muhammad. I never did do that because that was against our grain. We weren't to speak out against any brother that had been suspended. We weren't to talk about him or condemn him or fine him. He was already found guilty, but to degrade him. And I said that's not a part of Islam to do that, because there was a question said, would you eat the flesh from your dead brother's back? And that's like doing that, like digging up your brother and eating the little flesh that's still left on his bones. And we were taught this. Now they wanted us to turn the thing around and do the opposite, which was not the right conduct. And I told Malcolm about that. And he said you should state your position. So when I went back, I told him I was leaving. I said it right from the rostrum, because I knew that wasn't right. We had never done that. Quite a few Muslims from number 7 left. They didn't leave so much as being dissatisfied with Mr. Muhammad. They left because they were dissatisfied with the officials that were under him in Chicago and at number 7. That happened in temples or mosques throughout the country.
Elijah Muhammad commented to our source that upon referring to Malcolm, Elijah said the only way to stop him was to get rid of him the way Moses and the others did their bad ones. Elijah said you have to make an example out of the bad ones. He stated when you try to be peaceful and nice and love them, they just jump up and try to take over. Elijah stated that with these hypocrites, when you find them, cut their heads off.
We had a big convention there in Philadelphia. When all of the other ministers from around the country, they used to all get up and bear witness how great the Lamb were and this and that and the other. And when they would get on talking, the Lamb stood up and put his arms around Malcolm and said, this is my beloved son, whom you have to kill.
Malcolm had already been deemed the chief hypocrite, a Judas, a heretic, and all these other things. And Hare began to answer, apparently saying the things that they wanted to hear. Something needs, this is bad, something needs to be done.
In In 1964, following his break with the nation, the minister performs a pilgrimage to the sacred mosque in Mecca. He sees multitudes of men and women of all colors and races from all over the earth united in spirit and purpose. One humanity, one human family worshipping Allah. Sages show him scripture in the Quran and sayings of the original prophet Mohammed of 14 centuries ago. Sayings and scriptures which contradict teachings he learned at the feet of Elijah Muhammad. He now declares himself a true Muslim. The schism is complete and final, and for the remainder of his life, he would attract increased attention from United States government agents and would deal with constant threats from those he had left behind in the nation.
Since his defection from the black Muslims, Malcolm X has been a natural target for reprisal and a likely symbol for an object lesson to those similarly inclined.
The cab picked us up and was carrying us back, and when we looked around, we was down there in Chicago around the slaughter pens, where they had marketed the cows and so forth. And Malcolm said, "Brother, where you going?" And that's when Malcolm, he started looking, and I told the brother, I made the brother stop the cab. I had a pistol. I said, "Stop it right now." I made the brother get out the cab, and Malcolm got in the front seat, and he was driving. He drove the cab. We drove it to the we went to the airport, and we both jumped out and ran and got on the plane. And he said to me, he said, "That was close, wasn't it?" I said, "Yeah, it's gonna get closer than that." And this is when Malcolm told me that I had lost my religion. He said, "Muslims don't carry guns." I said, "Yes, and you better be glad I had one, because where that guy was carrying us was certainly was not to the airport."
When I was on the pilgrimage, I had close contact with Muslims whose skin would in America be classified as white, and with Muslims who themselves would be classified as white in America. But these particular Muslims didn't call themselves white. They looked upon themselves as human beings, as part of the human family, and therefore they looked upon all other segments of the human family as part of that same family. Now, they had a different look or a different air or a different attitude than that which is reflected in the attitude of the man in America who called himself white. So I said that if Islam had done that for them, perhaps if the white man in America would study Islam, perhaps they could do the same thing for him.
I was at the press conference. He would find the Muslim Mosque Incorporation and the Organization of African American Unity, patterned after the Organization of African Unity. I got the Constitution of the Organization of African Unity, and so that we could pattern the Constitution of the Organization of Afro-American Unity after the African Constitution, because we wanted to show the African connection. And when we hit up on a parallel that showed the relationship of the African organization to the African American organization, Malcolm was as happy as a child.
As we began to form the organization, people began to volunteer, to do different projects within the organization. And one of the things that had been said that we needed was a newsletter. So nobody volunteered for that. So I volunteered for it.
The OAU was not made up of Muslims. It was made up of just indigenous people that weren't Muslims. And some of them were nationalists, and he didn't really care what their beliefs were. But this was a political organization that was designed to gain acceptance at the United Nations as a non-governmental organization. You can have an office there. We weren't to talk to them about religion. because it wasn't about that. It was just political, cultural, that kind of thing.
Well, I've gotten a good reaction, a very sympathetic reaction, and an understanding reaction. Many of them had been misinformed by the American government into thinking that black people in America don't identify with Africa, and therefore they've restrained themselves from voicing their interest in our problem. But I've impressed upon them that our problem is their problem, as well as their problems are our problem.
The Egyptian diplomatic people have been instructed to show courtesies to Negro nationalists. Nasser's diplomatic people, who normally would not associate with temple-type low-class Negroes, now go out of their way to flatter them. Some weeks ago, our source called on the secretary to advise the department that through contacts of his in Harlem, he had had rather significant indications that money in support of extremist Negro groups in the recent riots was being derived from certain UN missions. Specifically, he named UAR, Ghana, Cameroon, Algeria, and surprisingly, Nigeria. The matter is obviously one of great political sensitivity, both internationally and domestically. The department considered the matter one of sufficient importance to discuss with President Johnson, who in turn asked Mr. Hoover to secure any further information.
Now, one thing though I do want us to be clear on, it wasn't so much Islam, but clearly Malcolm's internationalism clearly was a major motivating force that explained why the Bureau did not want to pull back some of the things that they were doing behind closed doors and flaming the fire. And of course, it was also Malcolm's domestic radicalism. In other words, there were many things that Malcolm was doing that were deemed subversive, that was deemed threatening to the United States government, to the Johnson administration, to Hoover's mentality and the mentality of members of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, as well as CIA.
And here was Brother Malcolm traveling around through Africa, equating and in essence saying that the United States was in no position to be telling the rest of the world, giving the rest of the world lectures because of the things that were going on in this country.
He had gotten the pledge of 8 African nations to take the case of Black America before the United Nations as a human rights case as against a civil rights case. And I do not think this nation wanted to suffer the embarrassment of having that done. He was exposing colonialism.
Our desire, our prayer, that we can have a peaceful, intelligent rally here this afternoon. But at the same time, we see that they have surrounded us with many of their own agents in uniform and out of uniform.
They're going to use techniques that they were already using anyway against other groups, during the war, even before the war, specifically communist groups. But when they initiate the first counterintelligence program, or COINTELPRO as they like to call it, the major target was the Communist Party, USA. And of course, that's going to set the stage for them to then, go after groups like the Socialist Workers' Party in 1961, Ku Klux Klan groups in 1964, the Nation of Islam, which had actually began, decades earlier. Counterintelligence deals with first getting the information and then using the information or using some type of scheme, some type of program, some type of technique, some type of activity in order to hurt, in order to discredit, in order to disrupt, in order to destroy, or they like to use the term neutralize, which is kind of like an all-encompassing term, which means to weaken to the point that it's no longer a threat. Now, one of the keys to counterintelligence, though, is to plant a seed and then to rely upon people to react to that seed a certain way. And if they give you the reaction that you want, then a lot of times that will accumulate in you achieving your goal. Now, another point that you want to be clear on is that one of the things that counterintelligence has used for a very long time is simply to exploit existing weaknesses of people. Jealousies and envies, personality conflicts, anything that they could use in order to weaken a target.
Chicago also feels that any anonymous letters or calls at this time could possibly identify the source of the information and could, instead of causing disruption, solidify the royal family and Malcolm.
One of the unique things that the Bureau liked to do, which helped to cause division inside the ranks of the leadership of the nation, they would draft a letter that was very critical of Malcolm. And then what they would do is they would then send the letter to some of Malcolm's enemies inside the ranks of the national leadership. So much so that Elijah Muhammad, having received one of them, thought that Malcolm actually wrote the letter. All they wanted was for you to think that this is a legitimate letter, take the information in it seriously, and if it can plant a seed of dissension, if it can plant a seed that could cause some type of division, it was a successful counterintelligence apparatus. Now, something else that the Bureau also did as far as a nation, which was vintage FBI, was they planted newspaper articles.
There have, of course, been congressional inquiries into the propriety of the COINTEL program and some of the activities the Bureau engaged in those days. Some of the congressional committees involved have taken great exception to some of our activities, and to this extent, we accept that criticism. I do, however, reject any suggestion that the FBI was directly involved in the murder of Malcolm X.
Paid informants was another technique that the Bureau would use, that most intelligence apparatuses would use. And then their job would simply be to attend meetings, to attend functions, to report on any information that they can get. They were especially interested in information that could be exploited.
I was recruited into Basi after I had taken the standard entrance exam for police officers. And then we took the battery of tests. And then one day they called 3 people I didn't know that were from Basi, called me down to the old police headquarters, and they asked me some questions, what did I feel about certain things, and one of the final questions was, what did I feel about Malcolm X? And I said, I didn't know that much about the man. Then they told me, we want you to go up to 125th Street and 7th Avenue, around the Teresa Hotel, hang around for a while, and get your face known. And so for about a week, I hung around 125th, chock full of nuts. And then after which, the following week, they said, we want you to try to get into Malcolm's organization, which was in the Teresa Hotel. So my next visit, I go to Malcolm's office in the Teresa Hotel, and I meet a fellow and express the fact that I wanted to join the organization. He gave me a questionnaire form to fill out, which I did. And then I started attending meetings.
Gene Roberts, of course, identity as a guard for Malcolm, undercover guard, never came out for about 6 years after Malcolm's death, when he was a witness doing the same kind of work in what's called the Panther 21 trial here in New York, when 21 Black Panthers were accused of plots to dynamite Saks Fifth Avenue and the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens and so on. They were all acquitted after an 8-month trial, the longest trial, I think, in New York's history, criminal trial.
A black person who takes a black leader and weaves his way into his confidence and then betrays him or her, or any other one for that matter, is decidedly beneath contempt. So if Gene Roberts were a part of all this, the man himself is totally beneath contempt.
Thank you. With Gene Roberts as a trusted bodyguard, the New York City police now had a man on the inside who could closely monitor the activities of the Muslim Mosque Incorporated, the OAAU, and the minister as well. In the cold, early morning hours of February 14, 1965, a Molotov cocktail smashed through a window of the house he shared with his pregnant wife and 4 young daughters. The minister and his family escaped unharmed through the flames and onto the lawn, where they saw the raging inferno destroy their home.
I stood in my underwear, bare feet, in the middle of my driveway with a gun in my hand for 45 minutes, waiting for the police or waiting for the fire department to come.
Having the threats, that's all I get is threats. I get not less than 6 or 7 threatening phone calls every day.
He found his family shelter at a friend's home, and the next day he flew to Detroit to keep a speaking engagement.
Distinguished guests, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, friends and enemies, it isn't something that made me lose confidence in what I'm doing, because my wife understands, and I have children from this size on down, and even in their young age, they understand. I think they would rather have a father or a brother, or whatever the situation may be, who will take a stand in the face of any kind of reaction from narrow-minded people, rather than to compromise and later on have to grow up in shame and in disgrace.
Monday night, February 15, 1965, while he was addressing an audience at the Audubon Ballroom, a disturbance in the audience distracted his bodyguards, pulling them from their assigned posts.
The dry run, as I felt it was, started. I was part of the front rostrum guards, the guards that stand in front of the stage. And to my right, or directly in front of me, there was a commotion, a couple of chairs overturning. I noticed an individual walking down the middle of the middle aisle. I took a couple steps toward him, and he took a seat in the second row.
Elijah Mohammed has given the order to his followers to see that I am crippled or killed.
Why the Audubon, they said, according to Harry, he said because they knew he would be there. It was as simple as that.
Learn the hard way. Learn the hard way.
Malcolm seemed to me at that particular period to be very determined that he wanted to stand his ground, that he'd come to the point that I'm saying now, that I believe Malcolm wanted to die. He placed no protection on him. He didn't want no protection.
When I got there that day, I noticed 3 people sitting on the front row reading newspapers. I didn't bother to mention because they were there before I got there, and I figured they had already been checked out. I didn't see where it was necessary for me to really bring it to anybody's attention. But there was 3 people sitting on the front row reading a newspaper.
I knew they were Muslims that were sitting near the front who had overcoats that was folded very neatly, just like we fold our overcoats. We had a way of folding overcoats. And I knew they were Muslims, but I didn't recognize them. I knew they weren't from number 7. And I kept looking out at the audience and coming back to them and looking out and coming back to them. And it was because of a deep silence that was going on inside of them that wasn't expressing itself on the outside, but it was there. And these were 2 of the people that were involved in his assassination.
I walked up the steps and I found no police officer, nobody on the door. And I went in, and when I went inside the Audubon Ballroom, I'm back there talking to a number of brothers, telling them that a game is being played here. And they said,
37, what you mean? I said, something is going on here, it's not correct. And they said to me, this is the way Brother Malcolm didn't want no protection, no searching on the door. I said, I said, do y'all have y'all peace? They said, we don't carry no guns. I said, oh, everybody walked in here today, ain't nobody got no peace.
None of them have an adequate reason for that. None of them. No one can answer justifiably why he stopped a practice that he knew would help save his life.
Nigga, get your hand out of my pocket!
He came out on the stage. The introductory speaker turned over the platform to him, and he raised his hand in a Muslim greeting, Salam Alaikum. At that point, I heard a rumbling behind me, and I'm sure everyone else did too, and I turned around in my seat to see what it was. And then we saw, I saw two guys standing up, and the next thing, my next impression, it all happened very rapidly as you can understand, is of the gunshots. And I saw Malcolm had his hand up. He said, stay cool, stay calm, or something like that.
Inspector, could you tell us about the two men that you have...
Oh, now let's start from the beginning. All right. Okay. Start asking the questions. Chronology. If you want the story, I'll give it you.
All right.
Okay. Describe what happened here. All right.
You ready? Ready? Roll. Chief, could you describe what happened here today?
At about 3:15 p.m. This afternoon, there were about 400 persons present in the ballroom here, representing an organization known as the Afro-American Unity Organization, headed up by Malcolm X. Malcolm was addressing the audience from the speaker's platform when suddenly, apparently, two men approached the speaker's rostrum and discharged shots at him from apparently very close range.
They burned his house, and from what I heard from a rumor that he said he didn't want no protection. But I think that the man should have had protection. I think so. Definitely in the, and if not by New York Police Department, is by the Audubon Ballroom. I think that they should have had protection. And second of all, this year, I don't think that they should have had a gathering. Do you think the black Muslims are responsible? I wouldn't put it on the black Muslim, and I'll say this year that I don't know whom did it, but I say that it's a very, very bad thing for Harlem, because at this moment, we're just getting over the ride that they had, and now with this starting off, this makes it worse. You understand? What do you think that's going to do to Harlem? Well, they're definitely going to have to fight now because Malcolm is dead. This is nearly as bad as when they assassinate the President of the United States.
I think I won't kill myself, I'll do it.
I went to the office meeting, and we went through the debriefing again. And again, I told them that I had gave Malcolm mouth to mouth. And Teddy asked me, what did you do that for? And I told him, I said, well, I'm a cop, and this is what cops are supposed to do, try to save people.
Thomas Hayer's people came over from Paterson, New Jersey, and asked me to represent him in his trial. I turned it down because, one, I had this relationship with Malcolm, and two, I was convinced that he was guilty. Of course, he was there. He was shot on the scene and apprehended on the scene, and I just couldn't bring myself to represent him. I would give it second thoughts now because it might have been a way to expose the FBI's role in this case. At the trial, he had said, as he took the stand, and first said he had nothing to do with it, then came back to the stand and testified for the other brothers, saying that yes, he was there and he was part of the assassination crew, but that these two brothers were not. And then he was asked by the district attorney on cross-examination to give up the names of the four brothers he said were with him, and he refused to do that. He was between a rock and a hard place because he didn't want to be an informer on one hand, and yet he wanted to tell the truth. Benjamin had been in the Fruit of Islam, the security forces of the nation, and he was looking for people who also had been in the Fruit of Islam. And both Butler and Johnson had been, and he would have recognized them instantly if he had seen them in the ballroom and alerted people to their presence.
Had Johnson and Norman come in, I would have known about it, or James, or the minister would have been told, should we let them in? Would have been asked, because we knew them and we knew what they were capable of, because we were all in the FOI. And there was Benjamin Brown, who had already been fired on, and George Whitney had been fired on up in the Bronx. So we knew who to be leery of from number 7. And Malcolm had told us, anyone who wanted to come, let them come in. But we had, even though he said to stop searching people, there were people like Norman and Johnson that would have been held at the door until myself or James or had come and said, okay, let them in.
He further advised that the sources have no information to indicate that either or Thomas Arthur Johnson, who were arrested with suspect Norman 3X Butler on January 7 last for shooting Benjamin Brown in the Bronx, were in the vicinity of the Audubon Ballroom around the time Malcolm was shot.
It had never happened. That's what they were watching for. That's why they had Kenyatta on the door, and they had certain people, key people in the house. They were told, if you see Thomas or Norman, you block off the exit and you come get us right away. There was no way I could have walked in there, even if I wanted to. Even if I was crazy enough to get a machine gun and try it, I would have never got in that place.
I know them quite well. I know them to the point that they was not in the Audubon Ballroom. That I do know.
So I'm watching on TV what was taking place at that particular time. And there was a lot of cops running around back and forth on Broadway. And, it was officially announced that he was dead and that somebody assassinated him. But I was sitting at home watching this. I had no idea that I would wind up being. And they gave me the star role. They gave me the shotgun role. And the guy with the shotgun is darker than my brother Hatim back there and had a full beard. I mean, he was very black-skinned. So many discrepancies, man. It's unbelievable. And we're going to get to something I think that you can tie together and you'll see exactly what took place. It was circumstantial. It had nothing on me, nothing whatsoever. I was home, couldn't even walk.
During summation, the district attorney, who's just recently died, Vincent Dermody, took the position in front of the jury that Heyer was lying, that he was so clearly guilty that he could not avoid being convicted, but he was trying to save his 2 Confederates by giving this cock and bull story that 4 other people and himself were the real murderers. And then I brought that up at Attica when I spoke to him. I said, how about getting those names? We can do something. We can get 2 innocent brothers maybe out of jail by a court proceeding. And first he wouldn't do it at all. This is in 1971. And the years rolled by after that. I had no contact with him. And then I met a Muslim chaplain in the prison system by the name of Nuruddin Faiz. And Nuruddin, when he heard the story from me, said maybe I'll go up and talk to him.
I never met Thomas here, never. First time I saw him, I was in the Tombs and I was waiting to be indicted. And they had me there for quite some time, and it was hot. I had on a suit and tie. I said, listen, what are you waiting for? So one of the correction officers said, listen, man, we don't want no trouble out you. You just wait and be patient. We're waiting on your co-defendant. About an hour passed by or more, and I see this guy coming down the hallway on crutches.
He said, all right, here he is. Come on, bring him out the bullpen. So when I got out the bullpen, I looked, I said, well, he's being funny or something. That's not my co-defendant. I don't even know this guy.
I believe that the persons Hayer has identified are the true murderers of Malcolm X.
We have to account for at least two of the guards. There were actually more, but two guards in particular need to be addressed. One was a man by the name of Robert 35X Smith. Okay. The other one's name was Charles 25X Blackwell. Both of them former members of Jersey Mosque. And what's going to happen is they're the two. They had just had a restationing of the guards right before the shooting took place. And so one of them were the rostrum guards. Now, what's important here for us to understand is that these men recognize apparently all of the assassins according to one person, but most likely, if not all of them, at least some of the assassins. And they basically did nothing. They said nothing other than to maybe one or two people after the assassination. And we have no evidence that they took any steps to try to see that justice was served, whether they went through the law enforcement or on their own. You would have to find it very odd. If you're a rostrum guard, and remember now, you're looking at the audience. That's your job. That's what you're supposed to be up there doing, looking at the audience, looking for any type of challenges, any type of faces, but particularly people from the nation. That was your job, by the way. Your major job was to make sure nobody from the nation snuck in who could cause trouble. That's your job. And you're recognizing this man over here. I remember him from the mosque. I think I remember that man from the mosque. The person sitting next to him, I think I remember him from the mosque. Antennas should have went up.
I knew no brothers in Mosque 25 other than the minister there, who was Minister James. He was the head minister there at Mosque 25.
That's one thing that was erased from our minds, was the fear of death. It was absolutely erased from our minds. And that's what a lot of people don't understand. They're not in the FOI. They can't conceive of any group of brothers doing something, carrying something like this out in public.
I do not believe the jealous idiots within the Nation of Islam had the intellectual capacity to understand the depth of a Malcolm X, the direction of a Malcolm X. So therefore, their hands may have killed him, but the direction of their hands, the intent, came from outside.
I totally reject the notion, the allegation that the FBI was directly involved in the murder of Malcolm X.
Everybody in the group of assassins came from the Newark Mosque. They all were Jersey people.
There has been a great deal of apprehension at my being out of the black Muslim movement on the part of the black Muslims themselves. And I had stated in a newspaper article about an effort to take my life back in January, and at that time the Muslims denied it. In fact, they tried to make it appear to my brother that I was insane. But on a program in Chicago called Hotline, was moderated by Wesley South, John Ali, the national secretary, admitted, I think it was Wednesday or Thursday, one of these days last week, that they absolutely were going to kill me.
Why are they threatening your life?
Well, primarily because they're afraid that I will tell the real reason that that I'm out of the black Muslim movement, which I never told. I kept to myself. But the real reason is that Elijah Muhammad, the head of the movement, is the father of 8 children by 6 different teenage girls. 6 different teenage girls who were his private personal secretary. 4 of them had 1 child apiece by him. 2 of them had 2 children, and one of those 2 is pregnant right now in Los Angeles, where they're his 3rd child. And the one who first made me aware of this was Wallace Muhammad, Mr. Muhammad's son. And it was their fear that if I remained in the black Muslim movement, and this came into the knowledge of his followers that they would leave him and follow me. So a plan immediately was set in motion to take me down, put me out, and the statement that I allegedly made, or not that I allegedly made, I did make it, the statement that I made about Kennedy was used as a pretext to take me down. But in reality, it was because I had come to New York and told Joseph, the captain in New York, and the secretary and the minister in Boston about these children that Mr. Mohammed had. And it was that right there was the real reason for my being out of the movement.
John Ali is a very important man in this story. He is simultaneously the National Secretary of the Nation of Islam and an FBI informer. He is named an FBI informer in 2 books by Lou Lomax during the 1960s and by Carl Evans in a book published 2 years ago. He never complained, he never sued, he never said a word. And second, John Ali is the man who met with Thomas Hare the night before the assassination and recruited Hare into the assassination team. And John Ali comes to New York 2 days before the assassination, and as soon as Malcolm is dead, he flies to Chicago, and there is a very famous photograph of him reporting directly to Elijah Muhammad on the evening of Malcolm's assassination. New York City Police Department said they abided by Malcolm's directions not to have a big police presence there. But it seemed to me that knowing what the FBI was doing and the close relationship with the FBI, that they must have had a pretty good idea. There was a lot of hostility out there and that anything could have happened. Malcolm always assumed he'd be killed and said so very publicly. And the next situation was that the police practically avoided the ballroom, only had one officer there, a uniformed officer who was hidden in another room.
I not only believe this, but I literally know this. And I know the name of one of the person who more likely was the main CIA agent and the conduit for any money that was fed into the nation by the CIA.
I have never, in all of the interviews that I've had, whether written or oral, ever comment on who I thought killed. Do I have views? Yes, I do. I have not commented, however, and I don't think I ever will.
I believe that the New York City Police Department, through what they then may have called BOSSE, Bureau of Special Services, had some people who, authorized or not, who were intimately involved in the killing of Malcolm.
No, I was not a part of the conspiracy to murder Malcolm X.
I did not have anything whatsoever to do with the assassination of Malcolm X. I was not in the Audubon ballroom. It was a total impossibility.
I can remember when I used to think that the Fruit of Islam was the most incredible group of brothers that I had ever seen in my life. In the early 60s, when I first saw them, when Brother Malcolm was there. I mean, they were impressive. The discipline, the way they looked, the way they carried themselves, the way they took care of business, and they were not to be messed with.
There were several assassin teams out there. It's just that the team that came out of Newark that ultimately killed him had their opportunity before the rest of them. I did my best to try to get as much information as I could on the men that Hare named. Ben Thomas, you know, was the Assistant Secretary of Mosque number 25. He was also the treasurer of the Patterson Mosque. Thomas will ultimately be killed on October 28th, 1986 in a small town outside of Orlando, Florida called Apopka. He took a .357 Magnum to the head. And Leon Davis, who was just an FOI member, he was like the youngest member of the assassination group. Willie Bradley, who ultimately fired the shotgun. He's about 28. He was known in Newark as the stick-up man. And Wilbur McKinley or McKinley, Hare never was really sure on what his name was. But he was the oldest member of the assassination team, and you know, he owned like a construction company in the area. Longtime member of the Newark community.
Thomas drew it in his own handwriting and described exactly how the murder took place, how they cased the Audubon Ballroom the night before. There was a dance in progress, and they mingled with the dancers. And then they came the next day in a Cadillac owned by one of them, parked it facing the George Washington Bridge. 3 sat in the front row and 2 in the back. And the signal was, as soon as Malcolm came and gave the salams, they would then have some sort of a diversion in the back of the room. A smoke bomb would be thrown, and one of the men was supposed to yell, "Nigger, get your hand out of my pocket."
And remember now, Hare is a foot soldier in all of this. He's not on the inside of who is taking orders from whom. What he always thought was that Ben, because Ben was an official, was the, and because Ben, was the major person who was kind of like, who called him into it, along with Davis, he always assumed that Ben Thomas was taking orders from someone else.
Was it true that that Farrakhan was physically in the Newark Mosque the day Malcolm was assassinated? Does this connection mean anything, or is it a coincidence? How is it that Farrakhan, who was trained by Malcolm, did not at any time come to Malcolm's defense, but joined the detractors against Malcolm and helped to set up the atmosphere that got Malcolm expelled from the nation, and did not say one word in Malcolm's defense during the period of suspension? I think you need to ask Farrakhan some questions in depth about his loyalty.
On that day, Malcolm X, for some reason, did not permit a search. And on that day, some black men got into the Audubon Ballroom with sawed-off shotguns and pistols and ended the life, the physical life of Malcolm X. I know exactly where I was on that day. I was teaching across the river in Newark, New Jersey, at the local mosque there, when we received the news.
I am firmly convinced, from everything I've seen, and I don't say I'm a prophet or can see backwards or know all the truth about everything in the world, but from what I understand, I do know, I think this was a spasmodic, spontaneous act by these 5 men out of the Newark Mosque who thought they were avenging Elijah Muhammad.
I do know that my father feared Malcolm after he broke with the Nation of Islam. He feared the damage that Malcolm could do to his work, to his many years of work. And I know that he would be relieved to hear that Malcolm was dead. I know that. But to say he is involved, ordered it, I can't say that.
For 43 years, I have been teaching that one day you will wake up to know, you will wake up and agree with me.
That's right.
From the looks of your numbers here today, it seems that you're waking up.
Yes.
It was based upon somebody, an official, putting out a certain energy, and the FOI person interpreting the energy and then acting on their own. That was how the FOI was structured, which is similar to the FBI, the CIA, and any other intelligence apparatus. And the Bureau has studied the nation well enough to know that if the conflict continued to grow, it could lead into some very violent areas.
Martin Luther King and Malcolm X were about to join forces and form a coalition. I saw Malcolm X speak in Selma, Alabama on February 4, 1965. He was ready to join the civil rights movement. He spoke at Brown's Chapel. He met with Coretta King and Andy Young that day. He came to support King's movement, but King was in jail and could not meet with him. The week before Malcolm died, Clarence Jones had dinner with him in New York City. They agreed on an agenda where King and Malcolm would come together. They agreed to disagree about self-defense, which was still a point of difference between them. But Malcolm X was going to organize the northern cities, and Martin Luther King was going to continue organizing in the South. And those two guys coming together in the winter of 1965 had to be J. Edgar Hoover's worst nightmare.
If some of the allegations that have been made are true, these are real stories, and the media is not going to rest until they get to the bottom of it. I think congressional committees would reopen some of the hearings, and the simple fact is, if the Bureau was involved, as some people allege, people would be going to jail because you can't get away with that in this country.
He used to tell us that everything happens on time. Everything happens on time, you know. Because look where he is now. Had he lived, who knows what may have happened. Mistakes that he may have made. Something he may have done to destroy all the good that he had done. Look where he is now. I mean, he's a martyr. He'll live forever. And they'll probably one day become legends, like around Buddha. You know, the light beam that pierced his mother's stomach. And that's how Buddha myths. But they created what they were trying to destroy, those people that killed him. And look at them. Look at all the people that were involved in that. Where's John Ali? Where are all those other corrupt people? The people that killed him. What did they gain from it? So who won? We all will die. You know? We all die. There's no problem with that.
I think all of this raises an important question. And the question is, you know, how do you, in fact, how do you offer redress to a Butler and a Johnson? How do you offer redress to a Malcolm at this stage of the game? Well, clearly we can at least address the question of Butler and Johnson.
Whatever happened, I felt is that I have to pay the price or whatever. That was my total belief. I never ever felt like I wanted something to happen. Only one of them's still alive now anyway. Because, you know, there's a phrase that, there's a time, brother, in your life when as you're growing up, as you're going through your transformations, and it was still in my mind at that time that, you know, this man was a big figure, Malcolm X, and he was the #1 man at that time, and as far as the national representative to Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and then the reputation that he accumulated through his charismatic way of speaking. And I didn't see any news commentators was able to deal with him, really. So he was very outstanding, you know, and I said, well, that's what I'm going to jail for, you know. I feel as though he was wrong. He shouldn't have said what he said. It was almost like if it's an honor to do this, whatever the price is. That was my dedication. So I never had any ill feelings. Even when Mujahid told me, Thomas Hayer, when he told me, he trusted me. I'm the only one he really told. He told me how it went down and everything. I said, listen, you know what you did? You made a bad move. It was a mistake for you to get on that stand and tell the DA that I didn't do it and Aziz didn't do it. And then when he asks you, well, who did it? What's the name? You wouldn't give up them names. How do you think he's going to let me walk out of the courtroom? So you should have never did that. I said, we were jammed from the beginning. So, and I told him also, I said, we're going to do a lot of time. We're going to come out the back door. I'm willing to do it. That's how I felt about what I believed in. That's how much I loved the Lord.
Learn the hard way. Learn the hard way for us all.
Raised up to show the world what righteousness looked like.
Yes, sir.
And how it feels to be righteous.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead, dear apostle.
Clearing a man of his past and putting him on the right road. This is a wonderful thing.
Yes, sir.
February 26, 1975, almost 10 years to the day since the rebellious minister was assassinated, Elijah Muhammad dies of a chronic and debilitating respiratory disease. Elijah's son, W. Dean Mohammed, who had been suspended from the nation by his father on several occasions for questioning W.D. Farrakhan's and Elijah's doctrine and divinity, is chosen to lead the lost founds.
Or if the surreptitious, deceitful, disguising beasts come in playing the music of the devil, singing the songs of weakness. Let your winds of emotions come against this house. It stands forever. Peace be unto you. Assalamu alaikum.
W. Dean convinced his supporters to abandon the mythical doctrines of Farrakhan and Elijah, to become Muslims and accept the beliefs and practices of true Islam as found in the sacred Quran and in the message of the Prophet Muhammad of 1400 years ago. W. Dean also angered many by setting in motion reforms that curtailed corruption, and within 1 year he had dismantled the feared FOI.
I am aware of certain key officials saying that the military has to control it, and the military should have a coup if any person like Malcolm threatened to take over. That the military should be prepared to conduct a coup. I was aware of that. And some of those, one in particular, I don't want to give his name to you right now, two of them, pardon me, were still around and still in positions. And I didn't feel comfortable leaving it there, and I didn't think it was an item for religion.
Minister Louis Farrakhan, formerly Louis X, seemingly accepted the leadership and changes W. Dean Mohammed brought to the nation. Yet he soon broke away and formed a new lost foundation with himself as leader, preaching the doctrines and dogma of W.D. Farrakhan and Elijah Muhammad.
He is my brother. He is the son of my spiritual father. I have great love for him and respect for him, even though we have differences. But those differences should never be taken by outside community to be differences that would cause us to do injury or harm to one another.
Yeah, I love Elijah Muhammad enough that if you attack him, I would kill you. Yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And I'm not a killer, but neither are you. But if somebody attack what you love, each one of you in here would become a killer instantaneously. Am I lying? Mother, let somebody look like they're attacking your child. Here's a woman who fought a bear because the bear snatched her baby. And she ran the bear down, screaming until the bear dropped her baby. Love casts out fear. We don't give a damn about no white man law when you attack what we love. And frankly, it ain't none of your business. What have you got to say about it? Did you teach Malcolm? Did you make Malcolm? Did you clean up Malcolm? Did you put Malcolm out before the world? Was Malcolm your traitor or was he ours? And if we dealt with him like a nation deals with a traitor, what the hell business is it of yours? You just shut your mouth and stay out of it. Because in the future, we're going to become a nation. And the nation got to be able to deal with traitors and cutthroats and turncoats. The white man deals with his. The Jews deal with theirs. Salman Rushdie wrote a nasty thing about the prophet, and Imam Khomeini put out a death thing on him, and it stands today. There's certain paths you don't cross.
There are a lot of people in the black community that consider me a traitor to my race and the community. I felt then and I feel now that I would get some negative feedback and I would get some positive feedback. I felt that it was a job I felt was the right thing to do.
When you know a story and you know it quite well, I feel something like Peter or any of those personalities who was around Christ, whom they ran away and left. Families began to break up. I've seen brothers, blood brothers, kill blood brothers. When you learn what revolutionary is all about, then brothers and sisters, you will get back in the alley and keep your big mouth shut. And that's truly is a true statement, because he learned the hard way that he was not the Messiah. He learned the hard way that he could not deliver that force that everybody thought that he had.
And I must say that when I first heard him, I went there with the idea that, knowing him only from what I had read in the papers. Were they real serious Muslims operating out of some kind of religious zealotry? Or were they cold-blooded killers being paid to do a job? I happen to believe the latter.
If you're very close to a person, day by day, and this person's mind is feeding you to a point where your former self is gone, the life you live, the things that you thought about, the things that you've done, it seems like dream history, like some kind of illusion. And here you have connected with this man, and this man becomes your teacher. And this man transmits his mind into your mind, change your habits, change your eating patterns. You begin to read the things he tells you to read, to study the things he tells you to study, to analyze the things in the same manner he analyzed it.
In 1971, undercover detective Gene Roberts was given the New York City Police Department's highest award, the Medal of Honor, for, quote, his courage and valor, close quote, at the Audubon Ballroom. Charles 37X Kenyatta went on to form Harlem's militant Mau Mau organization. He was gunned down on a Bronx street corner in 1969, but miraculously survived. As he lay bleeding in the street from 8 bullet wounds, he heard his would-be assassin shout, Allah Akbar, Allah Akbar, Allah Akbar.
When I became incarcerated, I read the Holy Quran. I think I must have read it about 200 or 300 times while I was waiting to go to trial. And that's when my mind opened up. That's when I started seeing things with a clear vision. And then the serious questions came into my mind. I said, well, we weren't practicing religion. Then I realized Prophet Muhammad was the messenger of Allah, not Elijah Muhammad.
I know for a fact that Farad himself repented his works, repented what he had done, and made an effort himself to bring about the end of his own works that were in contradiction or were in opposition to the true religion Islam. I know this for a fact.
The truth is true. And we are all to blame if we can't.
How's it going?
And we are.
You ain't done too bad either. You ain't done too bad either. How you been? You look good.
On a hot summer day, after more than a quarter of a century, 2 men, one an ex-cop, one a former revolutionary, meet again. And there are some who believe it is the way the minister would have wanted
Tell
it.
me about it. There was always. Tell me about it. There was always something going. Yeah, it was always
remember that
something
when we went to
going.
Newark, they would.
Yeah,
the people was they were really they were.
You remember the time we went to DC?
Yeah, yes I do. They
had that march, and then what? I think they had this big thing. Everybody like congregated around the monument.
Yep.
And then we had this big march went by Howard University and all over there.
Yeah. You know, The one thing about it, I say, your faculty, you're very sharp. You at least you really knew. You really you. Well, you know.
Those were some crazy years.
Well, I'm an old man. I'm 73 now. So.
Hey, I'm 54. How you like that, Malcolm?
Well, at least you got a few more opportunities to see the sun go up and come down.
Hopefully. Say hopefully.
But up until that point, things are about the same. It's been a lot of books. It's a lot of books, and a lot of guys got.
You know, I see books and I read articles, and it was so funny. I will wonder sometimes, was I really there?
Well, you know
what I mean.
I'm telling you, you do.
Really
well,
I mean, I see.
I get that same feeling. I get that same feeling. You know.
You say, hey, was I there? I mean, was I part of this?
That's true.
I don't know.
If you're very close to a person, day by day, and this person's mind is feeding you to a point where your former self is gone. The life you live, the things that you thought about, the things that you've done, it seems like dream history, like some kind of illusion. And here you have connected with this man, and this man becomes your teacher. And this man transmits his mind into your mind, change your habits, change your eating patterns. You begin to read the things he tells you to read, to study the things he tells you to study, to analyze the things in the same manner he analyzed it.
In 1971, undercover detective Gene Roberts was given the New York City Police Department's highest award, the Medal of Honor, for, quote, his courage and valor, close quote, at the Audubon Ballroom. Charles 37X Kenyatta went on to form Harlem's militant Mau Mau organization. He was gunned down on a Bronx street corner in 1969, but miraculously survived. As he lay bleeding in the street from 8 bullet wounds, he heard his would-be assassin shout, Allah Akbar, Allah Akbar, Allah Akbar.
When I became incarcerated, I read the Holy Quran. I think I must have read it about 200 or 300 times while I was waiting to go to trial. And that's when my mind opened up. That's when I started seeing things with a clear vision. And then the serious questions came into my mind. I said, well, we weren't practicing religion. Then I realized Prophet Muhammad was the messenger of Allah, not Elijah Muhammad.
I know for a fact that Farad himself repented his works, repented what he had done, and made an effort himself to bring about the end of his own works that were in contradiction or were in opposition to the true religion Islam. I know this for a fact.
The truth is true, and we are all to blame if we can't.
How's it going?
That we are.
You ain't done too bad either. You ain't done too bad either. How you been? You look good.
On a hot summer day, after more than a quarter of a century, two men, one an ex-cop, one a former revolutionary, meet again. And there are some who believe it is the way the minister would have wanted
Tell
it.
me about it. There was always. Tell me about it. There was always something going. Yeah, there was
you
always
remember that
something
when we went to
going.
Newark? They were
Yeah,
the people was they were really they were.
You remember the time we went to DC?
Yeah, yes I do. They
had that march, and then what? I think they had this big thing. Everybody like congregated around the monument.
Yeah.
And then we had this big march went by Howard University and all over there.
Yeah. You know, the one thing about it, I say, your faculty, you very sharp. You at least you really knew. You well, you know.
Those were some crazy years.
Well, I'm an old man. I'm 73 now. So.
Hey, I'm 54. How you like them apples?
Well, at least you got a few more opportunities to see the sun go up and come down.
Hopefully, say hopefully.
But up until that point, things are about the same. It's been a lot of books. It's a lot of books, and a lot of guys got.
You know, I see books and I see books. And I read articles, and it was so funny. I will wonder sometimes, was I really there?
Well, you know
what I mean.
I'm telling you, you do.
Really
well,
I mean, I see.
I get that same feeling. I get that same feeling. You know.
You say, was I there? I mean, was I part of this?
That's true.